Hi, everybody, and welcome. I am J.Thelander, and we are going to get started here in about a minute. I'm here with Sissy Young, hi, Sissy. How's it going today in Boston?
Very good. Thank you, Julie, for inviting me.
Yeah, it's nice. Great. Well, we're watching people file in, so I'll just go over a little bit of housekeeping. We are here today for how long is today, actually? I can't remember if this is 45 minutes or this isn't, let's see, 30 minutes. That's what I thought. Okay. But it's on my calendar for longer, 30-minute lunch and learn. And we sort of have found that keeping it shorter is better because that way we move through. And we also want you all to be engaged and also ask questions. So it is somewhat interactive in that Morgan on my team is going to be following the chat. And we're talking today about compensation and recruiting. So comp being my lane and recruiting being your lane, Stacey. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen as soon as that is enabled. And we are going to get into a little bit of update on compensation and sort of what's happening. Most of you are life science oriented here. So that's going to be somewhat of the focus. Although, I don't know, Sissy, from your vantage point, I'm seeing there's a lot of crossover between the life sciences and tech in terms of certain jobs. So
Yeah,
some
we
of
could, yeah, we
yeah.
should definitely talk about that for sure.
Okay, well, by way of background, I'm J.Thelander, founder and CEO of J.Thelander Consulting, and I've been doing this now, as it says here, nearly 3 decades. So we're in our 29th year, and proud that our data has been featured in all of these, in these all of our media outlets and organizations, which has really been fun to see. No one's more surprised at that than I am. And I hope you join us for our Caplander podcast. Morgan, who is also my daughter on our team, we do this now. We drop an episode once a week, and they too are about 30 minutes, and it's really fun. It's a great mix. So I hope and you can get that really on all the usual suspects, Spotify or Apple or iTunes. So we hope you join us. By way of background with the data, and this is sort of to our point, Sissy, we cover all the industries, biotech, and we've been at times like a third biotech, a third medical device, and a third tech. And biotech has been growing, and we see there's a lot of crossover in terms of industry for some of the jobs. What's your thought on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think sometimes with regards to what we're calling the tech bio companies, job titles oftentimes can be a little bit confusing and or misleading. So oftentimes from a recruiting standpoint, we actually have to dive deep with the companies to figure out what they're really hiring for, what is the job to be done, what are the skill sets and expertise and capabilities they're looking for. I think as it relates to compensation, that is the trickiness of also integrating between the tech sector and the biotech sector. There are some differences and disparities, and so we need
Some
to account for that.
similarities. We're seeing that really, it came up in the questions ahead of time is sort of how to be looking at the comp data. And really, I recommend that you look by total financing raised to date. And we know very well that companies are staying private longer. Companies in our data set are over 500 million in terms of total financing. And you can see that you can aggregate data to look by over 90 million. Once you get to sort of later stage, the comp stays very consistent in the cash equity mix. And that is far and away better than looking at most recent series of financing, because we're seeing now that because the raising capital is harder and taking longer, that a Series B can be over $100 million. We also look at the revenue in previous year, which is another way on our platform that you can filter data. I'm moving right through this because I really want to get to the good stuff of the comp data, but this is just to give everybody context and confidence in terms of the data and where it's coming from. We've actually dipped a little bit. It used to be 90 some odd percent US, and we've made a really big push into Europe, which you can see is growing. And then within the United States, the data is covered pretty geographically, as you would imagine, where companies are situated who have raised venture capital. And I have to say that geography is really a very little impact in terms of at least the chief and VPs. And then within Europe, a lot in the UK, that's been a big push with companies to see, as you know, between Boston and UK. And there's a separate data set from the rest of Europe. I'm going to only put in one pitch here for survey participation because we have changed our model at J.Thelander, and Morgan is going to put in the survey link. It's a give to get model, which means if you give data, you get the very same data back, and you get that for 12 months for no charge. And these are all the titles that we are covering now. And Sissy, to your point, there are so many titles, and many even represent the same job, but we keep adding and adding and adding chiefs, NVPs, and look at all these directors and the staff level, all the clinical, regulatory, manufacturing, biostatisticians, sales, marketing, engineering. I mean, you name it. And so again, the participation is really the best way because you have nothing to lose and you get access to your own job. So it at a minimum allows it to be really helpful. Okay, let's get into some data, and then we'll move into Sissy some of the recruiting angles on this as well. So we look at compensation and the comp levers in a couple of different ways. On the cash side, base salary, and then the current bonus means it was a bonus that was actually given. And then there is a target bonus, which is out on the horizon for the next year. And then you can get to total cash, which can be a combination of base pay and current bonus or just base pay. And Sissy, what are you seeing in the market in terms of companies when you're doing recruiting and putting in place? How often is a bonus part of the comp package?
For the executive level is a price of entry. There's a expectation both from the candidate side as well as from the company side to make sure that there is a robust bonus structure.
And are they setting goals in advance for this, or is it somewhat of an, you think, sort of an entitlement?
I don't think there's a sense of entitlement. It is pretty standard in terms of industry expectation. I think in terms of how the target bonus is being paid out, it is usually tied to both corporate goals as well as individual goals. So there is a meritocracy with regards to the payout. It's not 100% payout without any kind of measurement of performance, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point for those of you who are on this call to make sure that those are set because it really can be tricky to do it. And we don't see a lot of bonuses with earlier stage companies because that's where we sort of turn into the equity piece is the long-term incentive. And we look at equity in a very granular way and specific way. And I can't tell you this happens on literally every call with a founder or CEO or some kind of founder is to look at founder shares and then additional equity for the founders who have passed their founder shares. So that means if you're a founder executive and your first grant was founder shares, you don't get additional founder shares. You might get additional equity for the role that you're in. And that is separate and apart from a non-founder who comes in from the outside. And Sissy, how much are you negotiating all of this?
I would say that with regards to founder transition, to a non-founder CEO, for example, oftentimes that the art of the negotiation is about um, maintaining that engagement with the founder, but yet incentivizing the incoming CEO to take on a tall task. Honestly, oftentimes that change management is no small feat. And I think that negotiation oftentimes is pretty tricky depending on how complex the cap table is and how many insiders are in, and also the
Yeah.
anticipating outsiders coming in with the new CEO. The expectation is that the CEO is going to bring in a new round of financing. So then therefore the founder is going to be squeezed, and how does that look like? And so definitely a tricky navigational, discussion.
Yeah, let's look at some of that data. And it really begs a very good point, and that is it all takes some planning because there is more formality around private company compensation today. And it is because of the raising capital taking so much longer and that the rounds can be pretty big, right? That it is going to be the investors are going to take their fair share of flesh when they raise that, when they give you money. And as a result of it, there is going to be dilution and you have to, plan for that. So, let's take a look here at some data. And this comes, as I said, the J.Thelander data is real time because the survey is now open all year round. And it's very different than like a payroll plugin where we get our data because as we know, there are different job titles. There are leveling components that really matter. And it's important that it is an apples to apples comparison once the data comes to you on our platform. So this is for a company who has raised 50 to 110 million across all industries, and it's global data. So the sample size is 123 companies, and you can see that the median, 75th, and max, and this is really putting into effect, which is why I think in the beginning we were moving through some of this language a little faster, because it's easier to see it once, once the numbers are here. So you have base pay, an actual bonus, which means it's paid, and that gets you to total cash. And if you will notice that the total cash is not a straight addition of the median base pay plus the median actual bonus, because not all these companies have a bonus program. Some of these CEOs are just getting to their total cash from base pay. It really depends on whether they're setting up their milestones or their management by objectives. And that is really formal and it takes time. And some of these companies really look at this and just say, okay, we're only going to do it with the long-term incentive of equity. And we don't want to put a bonus program in because can be time consuming. And then here is, so you can see the total cash goes all the way up to 1.2 million. And I wanted to show you these numbers because some of these private companies are really getting into almost public company comps. And then here's the median, 75th, and maximum for the total founder equity, again, which could be a combination of the original grant plus additional equity for the role that they're in. And that's compared to the non-founder equity at the 75th and median, very stable. So Sissy, how are you seeing this translating into the recruiting market?
100% aligned in terms of the 5% equity is a pretty standard price of entry for the equity component. I think that the bonus structure piece is a little bit interesting because what I see more of a biotech lens, not the all industry lens. I would
Right.
say that the 50% bonus is in fact pretty commonly seen. And I would say shorthand wise, kind of biotech companies with sufficient early stage financing with a robust set of investors, the 500,000 base, 50% bonus and 5% equity, it feels a little bit like the 5, 5, and 5, feeling like a little bit more of the market that we're seeing. And to be fair, I have a disproportionate focus on the Boston market. And so that's definitely, there's a premium here in terms of the competitiveness for talent. I would also add
There
one thing.
can be. And I think that's a very important thing to talk about is geography, because sometimes it matters and sometimes it doesn't. I just go into our platform. I'm going to show you this. So
Yeah.
this is the J.Thelander platform. This is the sort of platinum level that shows you the job. You can pick biotech stage of development, industry, total financing. So I went and picked here a biotech company that has raised $5 to $30 million. I wanted to show you the difference in where this comes up. So you can see that there are 110 data counts. And I liked what you said, which is why I wanted to show you this, because you can see bonus as a percentage of base salary is
Mm-hmm.
25% average and median. And
Mm-hmm.
that was what was paid out versus the target, you can see also pretty consistent, 34% or 34% to 35%, right?
Mm-hmm.
This shows you all. So it can get very sophisticated, like we're trying to give you a snapshot. But I guarantee if you layer in location for every single job, it is going to be choppy because one job may be really high in Boston and one job may be higher in a different location. And we do have a whole mapping on here. Let's see if I can show this up in region. So there are pay premiums. Yeah, Morgan's telling me that I do have the comp planning. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen again. And this is on our platform. So this is the comp planning and this is the regional data. So this is looking at a CEO. And and this is showing us, okay, so I'm going to pick biotech, for example. I like biotech and diagnostic. This is just across the country, right? And this will show you that in Boston, right, it has this is the median and the 75th percentile. But you can, and that is very high, right? And that is one of the highest here. So, and you can see that in other locations, but if we picked a different job, if I took off the CEO and let's say I put in a chief medical officer. So you still have Boston again at the highest, but here in Northern California at 610. So, but the Midwest at 571. So you just don't know, because sometimes in this actually, like, oh, I just did we just did a group a webinar, or I got it in person with a law firm. And what they were saying is that they see with their clients, sometimes you have to pay more for people to be in the Midwest because it's not as desirable of a location. Are you seeing that at all?
I'm not sure if I see that, but I do see that in the major hubs like Boston, San Francisco, definitely the scarcity value in the unique talent. And it's interesting that you clicked on the chief medical officer line, because what we're seeing is that right now financing is starting to come back, but the investors are very disciplined and they expect that the entrepreneurs are very disciplined.
That
And
they're going to
that also means that if you're going to bring in a chief medical officer, you're justifying that spend on being able to deliver on key milestones and catalysts for driving the next round of financing and driving the next value step up. So you better be um, be ready to pay premium for the right person to be able to drive that as a chief medical officer. We're seeing that across the board. The demand for chief medical officer is high because the clinical stage assets that need to hit the milestone, they need a medically accountable
have to have that
executive.
person. So
Yep.
here's the chief medical officer, the 75th percentile by financing. And this is showing you again from the J.Thelander platform, another one of our tools, which I think is really great because I like to see this is by the financing under 5 million, 15 to 30, 30 to 50. And then this is the next level. And you can see that in terms of the compensation, that in general, the cash is going up, right? So there's a little nuance here, and it's not perfect every time. I mean, we have to look at the real data. And this is the founder, total equity, obviously getting diluted. And you can see they ended here, the trade-off, a little lower on equity, a little higher on cash. And then it levels out at that 5%. And you can see that this is the non-founder equity. And it's always running around 1%, 1.25. Here's the median. Again, very tight. Look at that. The 75th and the median for equity, the same. And here's the total cash at the median. So yeah, fill us in a little bit on the chief medical officer date. What's happening in terms of recruiting? Are you getting people from public companies, or how is that? Other private companies where they've been successful, people coming out of academia? What's the competition for talent? Where are you finding them?
Yeah, less likely to be from academia because I think that the need to execute and deliver is um, so pressure cooker, I guess, and I think that the executives and also the boards, right? Like the boards get very involved with chief medical officer searches because it's such a critical hire to deliver
Right.
on your clinical programs and et cetera. So I think public versus private doesn't matter as much where they're coming from, as opposed to what they have delivered in terms of other programs that they have delivered on, key inflection points, getting to critical milestone in a timely manner. Can they actually take on team management on top of managing the programs? Because
Because a CMO in a private company is doing a lot. And let's talk about the comparison between public and private, because this comes up a lot of times where companies call us and they are mixing public and private data, and and the boards don't like it, and it's really a bad idea because the public company data does not have the right comp levers. Just like we talked about the mix between cash and equity, public companies tend to be higher on the cash because they're not going to have that liquidity on the equity side. So really, I cannot recommend enough that if you want to look at public company comparators, that you understand that is a complete on and off ramp that is separate and apart from really using data like ours that looks at the mix between cash and equity, because there's no question that that is the most suitable data, and it exists. So there's really no excuse not to. Here's CFO looking at a Series C company, median year over year. And you can see that things are pretty stable, 23, 24, 25, 26, and that the equity is so like laser consistent around 1%. And then here's the 75th percentile. And like we said, going up to maybe 1.225. I mean, there are max numbers as well. And you got to plan for the dilution. and the compensation again very steady. So you're seeing, because the private markets are staying private longer and so stable, the compensation is really following that. We did have one comment or question come in, saying founders need to pay their bills. What are the typical salaries for the top 3 founders in a seed and Series A company? Well, as you can see, that all that data is available on the platform. I don't know who the top 3 founders typically are. Maybe the chief medical officer, the CEO, and maybe one other job. But you can see that the compensation, it doesn't have to be a guessing game. And I couldn't agree with you more that if it's a Series A company, meaning maybe you've raised under $15 million, it is important not to be wild swinging in terms of taking high equity and no cash, because the day of reckoning is going to come where you need to be more consistent, because you're going to start hiring other people, and as you said, you can't live on air and you can't live on equity alone. So it is important. It's never too early to put the comp framework in place. Sissy, what are your thoughts on that?
I agree. I mean, data-driven decision making is the expectation from, any robust board from a corporate governance standpoint. So data-driven, comp planning from the start is really important. I want to go back to your point with regards to compensation in public versus private companies, right? And more specifically for chief medical officer jobs. I would say that the phenotype that we're recruiting for private companies CMO versus a public company CMO, they're also different in terms of where they have in terms of track record. Because the private companies, oftentimes they want to stay private because they're still working through their science, heading towards that first in human. It's a different kind of CMO than a publicly traded company, more likely to have already clinical stage assets and programs that are progressing. So I think that, on the outset, you may say, where are they coming from? They could be coming from private or public, but in terms of what we're recruiting for the specific different stages of company, that's where the differentiation comes from.
Even with, that is reflected in the comp. We had a question coming in about when to stop using an outsourced CFO versus bringing one in house. And I think the data really starts to show you the kind of person. So here's this is looking at CFO, median total cash, and non-founder equity by industry, life sciences versus tech. And you can see that at the earlier stage, this may be a younger CFO in terms of their career. And so this person is probably replaced the outsourced CFO. And then at this point, you're starting to get someone who is a real CFO, meaning it is someone seasoned who has had a little more of a track record, a proven track record. And by the time you're getting to the $130 million in total financing, you are definitely with not an outsourced CFO, because you want someone who may take you through some kind of transaction. And you can see how stable the equity is really at this later stage. And there is somewhat of a premium for a life sciences CFO, and that it could be a biotech or a medical device. And it really could even be a tech bio, someone who has had a life science angle on it versus just straight tech. And it really just depends on how fast the company is looking towards some kind of liquidity, because that's where a CFO tends to be really in-house. I'm going to switch gears because we had a lot of questions on outside board member compensation. So I'm going to share our screen a little bit. So this is someone who is coming in as an outside board member. I think in many cases, we see this also using the language that this person could be on the scientific advisory board, or there are a couple of different ways to say it, but it's basically an investor, not an investor, but someone who is on your board because they have a knowledge base and very valuable contacts, or something that makes them compelling. And the different levers for an outside board member, it's complicated. It could be one-time equity. It could be annual. Most prevalent. What are you seeing on this? Because I know you recruit for this too.
Yeah, I think in terms of with the capital market being more robust and rebounded, sorry,
Bless you.
two roles are definitely the indicator. One is a CFO, The other one is the independent chair. And whether it's executive or non-executive chair is in high demand. And these are the conversations I'm having right now.
Right.
I would say that the equity piece for the chair role is tricky because I think the data would say somewhere around the 1% if it's a pre IPO gearing up towards that.
Yeah. Well, so this is showing you across all, and this is where the percentiles really are reflective, right? So the 25th is the 0.63%, the median 1%, and the 75th percentile 2%. So I would assume that the less equity is for a later stage company and the higher equity is for an earlier stage company where the equity is a little, or the person's just a total rock star and they don't care what stage the company is, they want a lot of equity and they're not coming on to be executive chair unless they're getting that.
Yeah, and I think that this is the tricky part about the chair coming in at the right time, because oftentimes that's an indicator to outside investors that they're gearing up for a bigger round, potentially a crossover, potentially going IPO. And if the chair can actually deliver on being the right chair to partner with the CEO to oftentimes it's either doing a strategic financing and or partnering. It can be parallel process. I think that that chair will negotiate and say, "Hey, I'm coming in pre-money with this kind of equity so that I can take the company to the next level with the CEO." Rather than saying, I mean, rather than saying like, hey, you're already done everything, right? Like they're coming in at a point where their
Partner.
contribution is critical.
Yeah. And we're typically seeing the 4-year vesting, same as the rest of the team. I want to get into a second on equity grants because I know we're running out of time and we got some questions earlier on this. So equity is obviously the most important piece, what differentiates the public from the private and why a lot of people are going to private companies. So the equity and the type of equity has different tax treatments. Obviously, not either of our expertise here, but just to be aware of not only what you own, but how you own it. And ISOs are the ones that are really the typical options that you get. It's percentage of fully diluted shares. And if anyone tries to tell you that there is a value associated with it, or they're looking out on the horizon to tell you that there is value, that's great, but it's nothing that you can count on with full certainty because we've seen down rounds and all kinds of other issues. And here is the type of financing, the type of awards that you grant. You see that RSUs tend to come in either very early or very late. And really all of this folds into, I'm going to go away from this. So it's 4-year vesting, and it's mainly time-based. And then again, the 4-year. And then the other piece of this is, I think this comes in, we'll finish up with this about refresh awards, because everyone always asks, do you have a program to refresh? And we all know very well from looking at the comp data that there is dilution, right? And so it's unavoidable. You raise capital, what you own, the piece of the pie is going to get smaller. The pie has gotten bigger. So, I mean, Sissy, I'd love your thoughts on what you're seeing in the competitive landscape. We basically have the philosophy at J.Thelander that it depends on how well you got it in the first place. If you granted the right amount of equity to begin with, then you should be in better situated to know who your key employees are and what kind of equity you need to give them to keep competitive.
No, absolutely. I mean, at the board level too, right? Like if the board chair, for example, coming back to the refresh, the
Right.
one-time grants, but then the negotiation will come into play in terms of having the refresh. So the philosophy having the refresh is something that from the get-go that the syndicate of investors need to align on. How do you prepare for that and having the right equity pool for that?
Exactly. Because if you do it, how often? It can be annually for key hires and that's who you refresh to, because it is unlikely that you're going to refresh to everybody. It's almost going to be impossible. There's going to be enough equity in that option pool. So it needs to be for key people. And ideally, you've given them the right amount of equity to begin with, and you're understanding what the dilution is and where they should be. Or it is for the refresh, it is as needed or after a financing. And this is all goes into I'm going to show one last slide because I think it's
I'll,
really
I'll
important.
just say, I'll just say that this is unrehearsed because I hadn't seen this data before, Jody.
Yeah.
I love it that the as needed and after financing are so clear because that's exactly what I'm seeing.
Yeah. This is the last slide, and then we're going to wind up. Is that there's also, you have to think about your option pool, not only in terms of what you have, but also what's reserved for the future option plan, granted annually in refresh grants, and granted annually in new hire grants. Sissy, you've got about 15 seconds to give us an outlook on what you're seeing. Is it a competition for talent right now?
It is absolutely a competition for talent. I think that the misperception of saying because there had been company wind downs that, candidates are everywhere. Yes, there are more candidates that may potentially be available, but I would say that clear and judicious assessment of the talent right for your company, your context is really important. So I would say that it's still very competitive.
Yeah, rock stars are always in demand. And from my vantage point, we thank you all for joining. If we didn't answer a question, we will follow up with you with an email and a recording afterwards. And we're happy to set up a call to discuss whatever we didn't get covered today. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye bye.